And off we go. And I'm just going to switch over to the slides here. Now, if you could give me a thumbs up if you see the slides, the Sunday Business Sermon with Jane Friedman slide up. Good. Yes. Wonderful. Seems like everyone can hear me as well. Excellent. All right. So I am often asked how I get so much done. And, there are some answers to that question that are very straightforward. Some are more squishy. There are some things that can't be replicated. Other things can be. So for today's session, I'm going to teach you or show you the things that I think can be replicated. But maybe if I could start by saying it really helps just to take the pressure off yourself sometimes. I probably don't get as much done as you think I do. There are a lot of activities that I go through really quickly. I don't do what you would consider due diligence. So all of those little subtleties won't necessarily come through in today's session. But I just want to, again, put that up front. Take the pressure off yourself. I don't want to advocate for productivity in the least, but it is an issue that I know a lot of people they're looking for tips or insights, and I hope this can be useful for you in that sense. So some caveats up front about what I'm about to tell you. I think the number one reason I'm productive, if I am productive at all, is because I don't have kids. So another personal issue is that I don't have family living nearby. So my life is very free of familial obligations. Part of that is by design. Part of it is by accident. So the other advantage I have is that I'm in good health. I don't have to struggle with any issues related to feeling comfortable at my desk or focusing on my work. I also have a husband who cleans, which is very useful. Although, to be honest, if I didn't have a husband who cleans, the house would just be dirty. I would be perfectly happy with those conditions. He doesn't like a dirty house, so that forces him to clean. But fortunately, he enjoys cleaning. And then the other caveat is that I have long worked with technology, and some of the things I'm going to show you today are kind of tech-based solutions that I've found and improved over time. And I know not everyone has the same sort of facility with technology that I have. And I also tend to be just very quick with this technology. I'm also a quick writer, which also affects how quickly I can get things done. So for example, I can write a blog post in the space of an hour. It's not the perfect blog post. It's not, I'm usually not striving for perfection if I complete it in an hour. But I know when to let things be. I'm not a perfectionist with all of my work. I reach a good enough point and I let it go. So I hope those laying that groundwork here up front helps you realize where a lot of the productivity comes from. Sometimes it's just your environment or your situation that can help you get the work done. All right. So I would say one of the biggest things I discovered that has been so helpful to me, and it took me a long time to discover this, was really taking control of my schedule and in just a ruthless way. And when I mean ruthless, I mean I don't make exceptions unless it's like sort of super, super critical. So this, for those who don't know, I went full-time freelance in 2014. So I've been working on my own and setting my own schedule now for 6 years. Although I say setting my own schedule in the sense that, I do have clients, I have demands on my time, I have deadlines to meet, but I get to decide when the work gets done. So I would say about 3 years in, it took me 3 years. I'm a slow study. It took me 3 years to decide that if I wanted to preserve my focus and if I wanted to be more productive, I needed to have a couple days per week that were sacrosanct. And I considered that Monday and Friday for my schedule. For those days, I do not take client meetings unless there's a really unusual situation, like I have to cancel on someone or there's an emergency, something like that. So no client meetings on Monday, Friday, even if people beg, like it just, no, I'm not available. And those are days that I use to rejuvenate, to focus on projects important to me, and just to have that uninterrupted time. I think that is really important, especially for writers, people doing creative work. Having that uninterrupted time somewhere in your week, I find it's essential. The other parameter I set is that I only do meetings. They could be client meetings, they could be other types of meetings, between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. So that's one of the reasons for this, is that I'm a late riser. So I often don't get out of bed until like 8:30 or 9 a.m., which of course can be problematic for one's productivity if you're not rolling out of bed until practically mid-morning. But when I get up, I want to be able to go to the kitchen, make some coffee, have some toast, do a little reading, and I might end up at my desk by 9:30 or 10 o'clock. So again, this is one of those sanity preserving things that I do so that I can make the rest of my time that much more productive. I've found that, again, this is what works for me, is when I do sit down at my desk, I am ready to go and I'm not exhausted. The other thing, I should say, I cut things off at 4 because I usually wrap up the workday roughly 5:30, maybe 6. So that gives me an hour at the end of the day to kind of think about or catch up on something that maybe didn't get done, to think about what the next day is going to look like, and just to give me some breathing room. I don't want to end the day on a meeting. I find that really discombobulating. The other thing that the other parameter is that I have a maximum of 2 client appointments per day. I might have more meetings than 2 per day, but I'm only just 2 client meetings a day. Again, this is just so I have enough time to do the other work that's on my plate. And then if I'm traveling, which I'm not this year, if I'm traveling, then I do block off days surrounding that travel to give me time to catch up, especially with things like email or just, sanity time. I even call it sanity time on my schedule when I block things off. And if I have a day where I have to write something, like I'm on a deadline, this particularly pertains to my Hot Sheet paid newsletter, which goes out every 2 weeks. I set aside the Tuesday before that goes out, the day before, I clear that of all appointments as well. And it's another one of those sacred days where I don't schedule anything, because I just never know how that day is going to go. I might need to write something, I might need to overhaul something. So I keep it clear of obligations. And if I don't need that time for writing or editing, great. I'll catch up on some other work. So I would give some time or give some thought to how you're structuring the time. And if I know not everyone is a freelancer, and you might have other commitments that give you less control over your schedule, but to the extent that you can, try to designate what some of those days are where you're going to have the uninterrupted blocks of time. It doesn't have to be a full day like me. It could be an afternoon or a morning, or even just 2 hours, whatever it would be a meaningful block of time for you, given your situation. I have a question about the Monday, Friday thing. So a writer's asking, I understand that you take off Monday, Friday, and I want to say I take off from meetings. I'm still working those days. So the question is, do I take any meetings whatsoever on the weekends? Or do you give yourself the full Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday? I don't take meetings on the weekends unless it's for a conference. So I will do speaking engagements on the weekend. But it has to, I try to avoid it though. Obviously I'm doing this on the weekend, but I try to keep the weekend clear. To be honest though, up until the pandemic, a lot of my weekends were travel oriented or speaking oriented anyway. So if I was at home, I always tried to make sure that the decks were clear, because you need time to rest, like you need fallow time, or else you can't do your best work when you're out and engaged. So I normally try to keep the weekends clear. I also try to keep the evenings clear, which isn't always possible. But again, it's just because if I don't have the downtime, I can't be productive during my core hours. Okay. So one of the tools that I use to really lock this in place to avoid cheating is I use a tool called Acuity Scheduling. And I've told Acuity Scheduling, look, I want you to make these days and times available. And then I also go in and block off certain days or weeks that are special, like if I'm traveling or something like that. So you can set up all sorts of different types of calendars in Acuity. Um, and you can have those schedules appear at different times and places for different types of clients. But I would say that this saves me so much trouble. I don't, once I set it, you can forget it. If people want to book an appointment with me, they have to go through the Acuity Scheduling interface, which is available on my site. I also have a link that I can send people via email. So they can access my calendar. It's a real, in real time updated calendar. It shows my availability, and then people can pick the time that works for them. Many people ask, well, I can't meet at these times. Do you have any flexibility? And I might, I might fudge a little, like 1 hour in one direction or another. But by and large, I don't budge from these core availability times. If people can't meet, they can't meet. And I don't bend over backwards. Of course, I'm in a really fortunate position where most of my appointment blocks book up without me being flexible. You might be in a position where if you are taking appointments or doing consulting like this, where you might not have that flexibility. But once you achieve a certain level of visibility or a certain client base, then you can be more strict about how far you'll bend with your schedule. So when people use that booking form through Acuity, this is one of the biggest time savers. Is I have people fill out all of their information through this form. I kind of talk them through, what, expectations for the appointment. I have them give me all the information up front. They can attach files and then they pay. So by having people pay up front, this also eliminates the need for me to invoice or to remember that they haven't paid or any of that. Again, I'm in an advantageous position in that I don't have to convince people to trust me. Like a lot of people who book with me already know me through some other channel. And so, there's not this concern that I'm going to scam them or abscond with their money, that I'll refund it if something happens and we can't meet. So if you're able to do this, even if you don't have people pay up front, just getting all of the information in one place up front for any type of meeting or situation is hugely beneficial. And then the next step, which again is a huge time saver, is that Acuity automatically generates an email that gets sent to people once the appointment is booked. So I haven't had to lift a finger through this whole process. It's all been automated. And since Acuity integrates with Zoom, and I use Zoom for my meetings, people are sent a unique link to join my Zoom meeting room. And because of that integration. So I don't even have to follow up with, here's the link you should visit to meet me. That's all taken care of once the appointment is booked. And then there's a reminder email that goes out as well. So all of this is, you can configure all of this. You can put anything you want in these confirmation emails. I certainly do, when someone is booking and I get this notice that they've booked, I do respond and acknowledge, it came through fine. This is the time and day we're going to meet. If you need to update me before the meeting, don't hesitate to email. So just reassurance that everything happened as it should have happened. So Acuity isn't the only tool out there to facilitate this. There's, I think, something called Calendly, which I haven't used, and gosh, countless tools, I imagine. I've been using Acuity for years. I'm really happy with the service. I think they do have a free plan if you want to test it out, but very happy, again, with how much time this saves me. Okay. I see in the questions there are people asking if I prefer Acuity to Calendly. I've never tried Calendly, so I don't know. I imagine that the two services are really similar. If you're planning to use Zoom for your meetings, then I would take a look and see if Calendly has Zoom integration, because for me, that's a must-have feature at this point. But Acuity has done everything I needed to do. It accepts payments as part of its system. I think it can accept payments through both PayPal, Square, and also Stripe, maybe those three. So I don't know if Calendly offers those features. So just you might want to make a list, of course, of what are the key features that you need. But Acuity, I've found, has every feature I could possibly want so far. Someone's asking what sort of information I collect for the meeting. It depends on the nature of the appointment. So there are about 3 different types of appointments that people can book with me. So the booking form differs, and it's evolved over time, certainly. With more experience comes more understanding of what you need to know in advance, or the things that people might not tell you that you should probably really know before the meeting. Certainly in the booking form, I on the pages where I discuss what, when I discuss what to upload, I give some examples of what people could send to help facilitate a more productive meeting. So I would say that, mainly I'm just looking for as much background information as possible. If I'm doing a critique, obviously I need the document that's to be critiqued. So yeah, I would encourage, if you set up a system like this, pay really close attention to the sorts of responses you get, and the sorts of appointment experiences you have. And if that indicates you need to adjust the booking form in some way to avoid misunderstanding or to encourage more sharing of information up front. Okay. Maddie is asking if I have any general guidelines about how one should assess the benefit of these time-saving tools like Acuity against their cost. So I didn't mention Acuity's cost, which I think I pay maybe $100 a year for Acuity, and it more than the usefulness is way beyond its cost for me. But certainly there are some tools that can get really expensive, like certain types of customer relation management systems, which I don't use because they are expensive. Zoom meeting, professional meeting subscription, that's like another $100 a year. So these costs can add up, especially if you're not doing a lot of business with them. But I would say, think about it this way. There are some hours in your day that are like $10 an hour, $100 an hour, or $1,000 an hour. And the time that I spend facilitating, the time I spend facilitating meetings or appointments, like just the rote admin of it, like what time do you want to meet? I don't know. What time do you want to meet? Like that back and forth, or the time it takes to invoice, and like some of these other like really low level tasks that anyone could do, that to me is like $10 an hour work. And so I would much rather find a tool or a system that might take that off my plate so that I can spend more of my time on the $100 an hour or $1,000 an hour work when I can. Certainly there are, virtual assistants and other people who can fulfill some of these roles. And I also have my husband, Mark, who is my employee and helps me with some of this admin, but I'm interested in reducing his workload too and having him focus on just the high value activities where we really need that human touch. But for appointment setup, at the very least, most of this is just rote, and it doesn't require anything but going through a series of steps. So the next thing I want to talk about is Notion, and this is really my work communication hub, my to-do list hub, a repository for so many things. Like, it's hard for me sometimes to talk about Notion because its functions are many. So it's what I have it open all the time. It's the first thing I look at in the morning. It has my to-do list for the day. It stores frequently needed information. It has guidelines that I need to share with people. It has form responses. It's a way for me also to collaborate with Mark on work tasks. So I'm going to stop the share here for just a moment so that I can share my Notion notebook. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Notion, it's very similar to Evernote. So if you've used Evernote, like it's like they're in some ways serving exactly the same purpose, for at least for me. So what you see right now is the first note that opens when I start my workday, which is the primary to-do list. And you'll notice that I have items for each and every day, actually going out all the way to where? To September 11th. So that may feel a little daunting that I have work scheduled out that far, but it's mainly a result of critique work that I do that gets scheduled way in advance. So, this gives me a bird's eye view of what's coming. I can compare it to my calendar and see if I've given myself too much work on a particular day, if I need to move some things around. It just shows me what the rhythm of the week is going to be like. And of course, Mark can see too what's on this list, and it just creates awareness. It ensures that he helps me in the right ways. As I finish these items, I do take them off. And so, my usual goal for any day of the week is that before I break for lunch or before I open up my email, I have completed the core tasks on this list. So I consider core tasks to be client work, where I'm working on deadline, people are expecting something of me on a certain date, like it has to be done. I do that first before I open up email. I try to do it before I open up social, although sometimes I have some social tasks I have to get through before I start on these things. But then everything else gets pushed to the side, and I get these things done. Then in the afternoon, I will switch over to other things that have come up during the day, usually because of email or follow up with clients. Obviously, I have appointments from 11 to 4. Then I would say by 3 p.m. roughly, that's when I will break into email if I haven't already. So email, I'm sure many of you who have been attending these sermons have probably emailed me once, or you've received an email from me. And what I'm about to say is not reflective of how I feel about any of you, but email is the bane of my existence. So it's the thing that is never done. So, I have about 100 emails that come to me on a daily basis. A lot of them aren't personal. They're newsletters and other things that I just have to read for industry purposes. But it's a huge volume, and it's also distracting. So I try to go through that in batches and really focused blocks. I don't want to have it open all day long. I don't want to see those messages pinging at me. It's just destructive. So again, I try to get to that core work in the morning, and then I'll save email for the afternoon unless there's something unusual about the day and I have to look at it first thing. So just to give you a little tour of my notes here, to give you a sense of how I use this, you'll notice that I've got another notebook here called the current HS issue. This is the current hot sheet issue that I'm working on. So this is a very quick link to the issue that will come out this Wednesday. I can just click and go straight to Google Docs. I also have some ideas, percolating down here. I also have links to all of the past issues sitting here since they're often requested. I want to have them at my fingertips. And of course, this is something that Mark has access to as well, and we use them regularly for customer service. I have a folder for booking links. So when people just want to have a meeting and they're not using the booking form for some reason, I can send them these booking links. Here's another secret, which I don't, I don't want to say I'm reluctant to share this because I don't want anyone who's received a critique from me to feel like I've cheated them. But there are certain problems in queries, synopses, and book proposals that come up again and again and again. So rather than rewrite the same critique again and again and again, I have what I call my stock phrasing note, where if I'm critiquing a query and I see, oh, this query doesn't have anything about the story premise, and I need to explain to the client what a story premise is, I can go down here and I can copy and paste the language and put it into my email. You'll notice I also have up here at the top a form or a template. So I just copy this and I paste it right into the email, and then I fill it out. Most of the emails I send to clients are customized. It's not just a form response, but for those issues that come up frequently, I have this well of responses that I've written over time and refined and that I refer to. Okay, so this is a folder where I keep notes about what will go in my next electric speed issue. So this is the free newsletter I send every 2 weeks. So if I ever spot something out on the web, or I see something interesting come into my email inbox, rather than look at it right that second, I will just dump it right here in this note. You'll see I have lots of ideas going pretty far back. And so this helps me put out the newsletter more efficiently, because I'm not just sitting at my desk wondering what's going to go in today's issue. Instead, I've got my ideas all here in one spot. Similarly, I have a folder for just links that I've seen while browsing social, but I don't have time to visit them at that moment. So for those of you who are Mac users, like you use an iPad or an iPhone, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but if you're reading something, you can save it or send it somewhere. Like you can send it in a text message, you can email it to yourself. If you use Notion, you can also save it to your links folder, as I've done here. So, there's something here I've saved. I don't know what it is, but if I click on it, it will take me to something I spotted earlier and wanted to make sure that I didn't forget. Usually this is relating to my newsletter, stuff that I didn't want to forget. So I have certain triggers that remind me, oh, I need to check my links folder to see if there's something that pertains to what I'm writing. I do a lot of talks and workshops and so on, and I'm communicating frequently with conference organizers. And so I'm asked for workshop descriptions all the time. I'm also asked for my bio all the time. And so I have all of those sitting here that I can just quickly copy and paste into an email. And obviously I can search this by keyword. It goes on forever. But again, right there at my fingertips, I don't have to open documents. I don't have to run a global search. Going down a little further, we're getting into some collaborative documents, like you see a Mark Jane work folder here, stuff that we're communicating on. I've got a huge series of work lists in this folder. I'm just laughing at my angry email prevention. That was a reminder to myself to avoid writing angry emails to people, which I don't do very often. I have a whole section here on webinars with scripts and schedules and so on. These are for the paid sessions that I do. There's a whole notebook here for advertising. This is advertising that goes in my Electric Speed newsletter, and you can see it's broken down by month and by year. I used to have a conference tracking table here, but this is all kind of moot at this point. All of these events have been rescheduled or canceled. I've got a folder or a notebook for hot sheets where I take notes on sessions I've attended virtually or in person. This is a gold mine over time, like so many things that I've written about that I can search for and always remember in what situation I learned that certain statistic. Past projects, this is like an archive, decline templates. These are templates for when I need to tell someone no. So it helps, again, it helps me avoid writing things from scratch. I've said no lots of times, so I'm just going to use the language that I used before and customize it as needed. So I hope that gives you an idea of just how versatile Notion can be for work process. As you can see, I used a lot for recurring information that I need for the template responses and so on. So I'm going to stop the share and go back over to my slide presentation. Get a drink. Okay. I have a writer asking, as I remove things from my to-do list in Notion, are they archived? They are, in the sense that Notion is continually saving older versions of this to-do list. So if I wanted to go back to earlier versions of it, I could do that if I made some horrible error or I need to research something that I was working on. But I love deleting things. I love expunging. So that's not something that I would do. If you're concerned about saving some of those old to-do lists, you can use a different sort of to-do list function in Notion. In fact, this is what Mark does because he likes to save everything. You can use like a checkbox sort of list so that when you check the box, it gets crossed off and it's still there. So there are other ways that you could do this if you want to have a paper trail or a virtual paper trail. Let's see. I have a question about whether my to-do is mainly focused on a delivery date for a project, or do you capture when to start something? Oh, that's a wonderful question. So my to-do is mainly based on delivery dates or deadlines, although what you don't see on this list is things where I'm scheduling myself to do items in advance of when the work is due, which I sometimes have to do with, of course, more complex projects. What was the other thing I wanted to say about this? Oh, yes. Another thing I learned early on is that a to-do item is worthless if it's not something I can get done in roughly a single work session. And a single work session for me might be anywhere from like 20 minutes to 60 minutes. So if I can't get it done in roughly an hour, I might never do that to-do item because it's too overwhelming. I break it up into its smallest possible components. This is really important to me for hot sheet writing because some of those items that I write require reporting and research and phone calls. So I would never want to put down that I'm going to write a hot sheet item on this really complex topic on a to-do list. I would instead break it down into email my contacts with questions, or assemble all my notes, or watch this webinar and take notes. And so by breaking it up into its smallest components, I have a much better idea of how much work is in front of me, and it also feels more achievable to do it. Maddie asks if there's a benefit to keeping responses to frequently requested info, like a bio or a headshot on a web page, and just sending the requester a link to that. Absolutely. If you would like to do that, by all means, do it. A lot of the people who email me are expecting what I would call like custom responses. So in my case, sometimes it's just better for me to copy and paste things over that's really specific to the person I'm corresponding with. But certainly I have things like webinar instructor guidelines and advertising guidelines, things of that nature, where I do send people to a link. And in fact, what's really helpful about Notion, I forgot to mention this, is that any note you create in Notion can be turned into a web page. So there are some of those notes that are in fact web pages, and it generates a unique link, and then I can put that in an email. So yeah, it's not an either or. You can do both. It just depends on the context. Sarah asks how much Notion costs. She recalls that it's pricey. It is pricey, especially when compared to Evernote. I think I paid maybe 50 or 60 bucks for Evernote in a year. With Notion, now this is two people using it, not just one. I think we pay maybe close to 200 a year. So it is kind of crazy expensive, considering it's just a note-taking tool, right? It's more powerful though than what I've shown you. Like it has database functionality. It has some like crazy capabilities that are above my head, which maybe most of you aren't going to use. But I found that it's just I like how pretty it is, and I know that may sound silly, but I like the fact I can put icons, I can put a rainbow on my to-do list. I could like, it also has this light, airy, and bright feel, whereas Evernote just felt kind of dark, like I was working in a dungeon. So just because of the aesthetics, I was willing to pay more. So I think just recently, Notion they did introduce a more ample and generous free version. So if you haven't taken a look at Notion recently, like within the last 6 weeks, perhaps, take another look at their free plan because I think it's uh, it's much easier to move along with Notion on the free plan rather than the paid plan, which I've had to buy into because of the capability that I need. So I hope that helps. All right. Joel asks if Notion interfaces with Google Calendar or Outlook Calendar. I'm not sure since I don't use it in that way, but I would have to imagine that it likely does. But I don't have a ready answer for you, I'm afraid. Nancy's asking what sort of calendar I use, digital or paper. I am entirely digital. I'm on Google Calendar, so that everything I do is scheduled on Calendar, even personal stuff. And it's become a little bit like a journal for me because I can go back now 10 years. That's how long I've been using it and see what exactly I was doing on a particular day. I can look back and see when I scheduled my very first date with Mark. So there are a lot of those sweet little things that also get worked into it. And so, yeah, Google Calendar. All right, so moving on. I want to talk briefly about gravity forms. So, not everything that I do is appointment based. A good part of the critique work I do is done only via email. And I use gravity forms for critique work that people are engaging me for. So at my website, which is a WordPress-based website, I have a plugin. It's called Gravity Forms, and I do have to pay for this plugin. I think I pay, I don't know, $80 a year for it. And it allows me to develop these really powerful forms, which allow me to accept attachments and then also have a payment processor on the end of it so that people, again, can pay up front. I don't have to invoice people. All the information I need is sent to me, and then I'm ready to do the critique as soon as the form is submitted. So again, huge time saver. I would think of it as something very similar to Acuity. In fact, I could probably use Acuity for this if I were using it in an unconventional way. I mean, Acuity is for scheduling things. So I bet if you were creative, you might be able to use Acuity for this sort of purpose without having to set an actual appointment. I'm just guessing, but I think you might be able to do it. And the reason I'm suggesting it at all is because Gravity Forms is a little bit expensive for folks. And if you're already paying for Acuity, you might want to try and get it to do more things for you. But in any event, this is how my business has evolved. I'm pretty happy with the system, and Gravity Forms is just a rock solid plugin. It's very sophisticated. Another tool I use that saves me considerable design time and also the trouble of having to hire a designer is Canva templates. And I imagine many of you are familiar with Canva. It's has a free plan. I've only ever used the free plan. You can find it at canva.com. And I'll just show you briefly. I'm going to stop the sharing again and go over to a browser window. Give me just a moment. Okay, so right now I'm in the Canva template that I created for webinar promotions. And so right now, it's just a huge, like 25-page list of the webinar promotions. And so this just makes it like it's the same format every time, it's the same font every time, et cetera. So this just cuts a lot of the guesswork out of designing the next webinar promotion. And you can see that I've also been using it for some other tasks as well. But if I just go back to kind of my design well here, I also have a similar thing happening for the Square webinar promotions, where it's just one big list of all of the graphics. So if you are creating graphics continually, if you're doing lots of social media sharing, this could apply to blog posts as well, like your blog post intro images, or to Instagram shares. I find like it's so much better than like opening up Photoshop, which is what I used to do, or any of those heavier graphic design softwares. And of course, Canva gives you some really wonderful design templates so that you can get a professional looking design without being a designer yourself. Okay, back to the slides. All right, so now that perhaps the biggest topic of all, which is email, which I already called like the bane of my existence. And I just mean that from like, a work perspective. Like, as I said, it's always coming in, it's never done. To some extent, there's always something urgent in it. So it's always this like little thing in the back of my head. When was the last time I checked email? Since I deal with clients so much through email, that makes it particularly important, to be ready to respond, to clear time in my schedule to respond. Something really important, well, two things really important I've done to manage the email is, first, I've created accounts, different email accounts based on who that person is to my business. So for instance, I have an email dedicated to people who are submitting query critique work. I have an email dedicated to people contacting me about courses, online education. I have an email dedicated to people who are using my contact form at my website, etc. So this allows for delegation. So, I have a separate email account for hot sheet newsletter customer service, and Mark is the person who monitors that and takes care of things that come in there. Same for, things that come through courses. Often they're of a customer service nature, so he's going to tackle that, and I don't have to worry so much about it. So this saves time if you're able to delegate, but it can also save your sanity, because you might not want to go into your main email account if you just want to check and see if there have been new form submissions through your client intake form, for example. So anything that is something you want to be checking frequently, or you want to know immediately when an urgent email comes through, you may want to consider what sort of email addresses you can create that are specific to that, or you can consider setting up certain filters in your email software that flag those messages, or just create certain triggers that ensure that you see it quickly, or that you see it first. So that's one thing I've done that's been hugely helpful at managing this. The second thing that's been super helpful is that when I first check my email in the day, and as I mentioned, that might not be until 3 p.m., then I'm going through quickly, we're talking about like 100 messages. So I'm going through quickly and identifying, does this need attention right now? Do I need to respond today? Anything that I'm not going to respond to immediately gets a flag. So all email systems have a flag or a star or something that you can use, to help categorize it. So as you can see here on this screen capture, this is after I went through my email over the weekend, just checking in. You'll see that I have 5 messages flagged here that I wasn't able to get to by the end of the week. And they're all related to client work, with the exception of one that has to do with a speaking engagement. So the reason this is so helpful is that when my email inbox starts to fill up to like 20 messages or 50 messages, I've still got those really important client flagged messages all sitting in one place, so that when I have a free 30 minutes or 60 minutes, I can go back and then start responding in a focused block of time, rather than like hunting through all of those emails to figure out, is there something here important I need to get to? Did I miss something? And also it gives me a really clear view of how far behind am I, which, I'm a little bit behind right now. How much work is here? So this might be a couple hours of work, etc. So it's just the visual here for me is critical, and it also keeps me out of some of the distractions of email. So I hope that's helpful for those of you who have similar email problems. Something else that I use, which I touched on a little bit with the Notion to-do lists and folders, is that when I get emails through like the contact form at my website or through courses, kind of these general catch-all accounts, very often the questions are the same. Can you recommend an editor? Can you tell me how to get published? Can you be my agent? So, for all those sorts of questions that get asked again and again and again, I have ready to go responses. Sometimes I have documents that I send, like I have a recommended resource list that includes editors, designers, marketers, lawyers, publishing service companies. So anytime someone asks for something like that, I can just immediately respond with the resource list. And then I go an extra step, and at the site, I try to make it really clear, look, you shouldn't contact me to be your agent because I'm not one. I don't edit manuscripts, et cetera. So I try to cut people off at the pass for some of those questions where they just haven't looked that closely at who I am or what I do. But certainly I also provide encouragement to contact me if they're looking for something specific that I can help with. And then Mark, to give an example of one of his time savers, when we run paid classes and people want the recording because they couldn't attend live, people will start asking for that recording like 2 minutes after the webinar is over. It's like the requests come in immediately. And so he decided, rather than respond to all of those one by one, he would just send a message to everybody who didn't attend, which Zoom tells us who didn't attend the webinar. So he'll send a message to all those people and say, hey, we know you didn't attend and the recording is coming. So that has really nipped in the bud a lot of that unnecessary back and forth. And again, just to emphasize, the more you can fix problems before they start, the better. So especially once you've been freelancing or engaging in business for a while, you know what the common problems are. And I try to communicate as much as I can upfront so that people can fix their own issues. So when people submit materials for critique, and I know that sometimes my responses go to spam, on my thank you page, I explain, hey, try not to let my emails go to your spam. Here's where you should look. And hey, if you haven't seen my advice on how to get published, here are those links, because people inevitably will ask me these questions without having read the site. All right, so I see there are a number of questions here, so I'm going to go through what we've got. We've got a nice 10 minutes. Diana asks what email company I use, and my email host, I should say, goes through my website host, SiteGround. So that's the technology that underpins my email delivery. The email software that I use is Postbox. So I've been using Postbox for a number of years now. I think it costs 30 or 40 bucks. And again, one of the reasons I like it is that it's very clean and streamlined, and it allows me to just really easily organize my emails. So that's what I've ended up using. Before Postbox, I was using Thunderbird, and I avoid Gmail like the plague. I can't stand the Gmail interface. So that's how I've ended up with Postbox. Okay. Maddie asks how I'm grouping together my Canva designs on the free plan. So I just, I create a design, and then once the design template's created, I just add new pages. So every time I need a new design, add a new page, add a new page, add a new page. I have no idea what the paid plans do for you, but for me, this system on the free plan has worked good enough. Sarah asks if I use Stripe to accept credit card payments through Gravity Forms. Yes, that's exactly what I do. And there is a third-party plugin. I think it's called Stripe for Gravity Forms. It's free. So that's the one I use. It's not the approved way to use Stripe with Gravity Forms, FYI. Gravity Forms makes you level up to a more premium version of the plugin if you want that payment processor. And I'm a cheapskate and I refuse to do it. So that's why I'm using a free third-party plugin, which means, if something breaks or it doesn't work properly, it's on me to figure out why, as far as the payment processing. But that's what I would suggest trying, because I've had very few problems using that Stripe for Gravity Forms method of payment. Joel asks, who's the website host again? The website host is SiteGround. So that's SITE Ground, GROUND. And I highly recommend them as a website host. And they have the email hosting baked in to that. So you get both. I have an anonymous attendee asking how the app is populated directly from email, or do you have to manually put all your data into it? And I'm not sure. I'm so sorry. I don't know which app you're talking to, since I've obviously progressed pretty far into this session. So if you can ask the question again and let me know which app you're talking about, maybe I can offer more information. Catherine says, in a talk I heard you give, you talked about Evernote, and did you completely replace it with Notion? I did. And the trigger for that was Evernote kept breaking my to-do list. And I won't go into too much detail about what that means, but it happened often enough that I just got fed up and I started looking for alternatives. And when I found Notion, I was like, well, it already looks better. Like, it already looks more like a pleasure to use. So I'm just going to switch. Although it did take me a while to commit fully because of that increased price. But I haven't looked back since. And Nancy says, what is your email management strategy? And Nancy, I think you asked this early on, and I imagine you were looking for exactly what I just discussed with the email triage. But if you have anything to add on to that question, something more specific, do let me know. Jennifer asks, do you have tips for virtual workshops via Zoom? I have to give one on Wednesday. Well, some of the technical tips I think are probably, they might be obvious, but they're worth repeating, which is make sure you have good light. You don't want to be backlit so that your face is in shadow. Make sure you have a decent microphone. Obviously, I have a really nice microphone here, but if you don't have a USB microphone, like a Yeti microphone, which is what I recommend as a cheap USB microphone, you could use your Apple earbuds, assuming they have the microphone set into the wire. Those actually sound really good. So use a microphone if at all possible. And yeah, aside from that, I would say everything just depends on the context and the audience and what they're looking for as far as how to run a great workshop. If you know how to run a great workshop in person, as far as like a writing workshop, often they translate really well into Zoom. Have an agenda, have a structure, build in time for questions, as I have, and I think that's half the battle. Okay, let's see. Oh, so the question earlier about the app. So this is a writer wondering about Notion. It looks like putting all that info in there and keeping it organized is a large amount of work in itself. So yes and no. So, I started using Evernote ages ago, I would say in 2012, maybe. And so over time, you store more and more and more and more stuff in these places. I mean, initially, I'm sure there is a bit of a heavy lift if you've got stuff on sticky notes and in Word documents and, 4 or 5 places. It is going to take some time to consolidate it all in one place. But once you decide this is where I'm putting everything and I'm not putting it anywhere else, then it's just a self-perpetuating system. So with Evernote, when I made that transition, fortunately, Notion has an import function. So everything I already had in Evernote accumulated over many years, seamlessly populated in Notion, and I didn't have to do anything for that process to just happen. So yeah, it's just I just build on it day after day. At this point, it's like a repository of files. It requires not a whole lot of work to maintain, although obviously you have to have in mind what structure is going to be useful to me. How am I going to remember that I actually put it here? I certainly have some folders in Notion that I've long forgotten about, and I don't remember that I even put it in there. But for the really important day-to-day stuff, you do not forget. All right. Wendy says, does Notion keep the material on your own computer or in the cloud? And have you ever lost any data? I haven't lost any data, knock on wood. It is stored both in the cloud and I want to say locally too. So like I'm able to use it when I'm offline. So to me, that says that it's stored locally. But also when I switch devices, so like if I'm on my phone, if I'm on my iPad, if I need to access it on the web through someone else's computer, I can do that. So it's versatile in that you can access it in multiple ways and have it sync across all your devices. So in that sense, it's kind of like Dropbox. If you're a Dropbox user, Dropbox will store copies of the documents locally, but it's also stored in the cloud. So I don't really have any fear that I'm going to lose my data. And it's also backed up, of course. And Maddie asks if I have any experience with Trello and how it compares to Notion. I used Trello eons ago, like around 2012, 2013, when I was working on a publication that had a lot of different players involved. And there, it made a certain amount of sense because there were like stages of the production process. There were a lot of to-do items for other people. I think it's good if you have a lot of project management concerns, like if you're dealing with complex projects with multiple people involved. But as soon as I was not involved in that publication, I stopped using it. I was not a big fan of Trello. Now, that was a long time ago. So I imagine that that system has changed a lot. So I can't comment on what it looks like today or how it might compare to Notion, but I think Notion is probably more befitting individuals, although it's certainly marketed for teams and workplaces. I just haven't seen how it gets used, so I can only speak to what I've been using it for. Yolanda asks how Slack compares to all these other programs. I wish I could tell you, not a Slack user. Yeah, I know that it's an email replacement, but I'm not, I feel like Slack is used for like internal communications at companies for the most part. But I'm sure it gets used for more diverse cases, but it's not something I've ever considered. Jana asks what I use to manage social media posts. Most of my posts are done live. And then if I am going to schedule something in advance, I use Buffer. Karen says, how do you distinguish between what you save in Dropbox versus Notion? Is Dropbox actually documents? Exactly, yes. So Dropbox, I use that to save client documents. I use it to save resource lists, presentations, handouts. Anything that's a Word document basically goes in Dropbox. If it's a Scrivener document, it goes in Dropbox. I would never save documents in Notion unless I just needed it as a reference point. Catherine says, if I'm not mistaken, you also use Google Drive. That's true. And how do I organize it and how does it work in combination with Notion? I use Google Drive similar to how I use Dropbox. I use it to save documents. And why do I use both Drive and Dropbox? I don't think I could explain the rationale, but they each have their purpose. Google Drive tends to get used more with collaborative documents, Dropbox more with private documents. So I like to keep client documents on Dropbox, for example, whereas Hotsheet gets written in Google Docs because I have a copy editor and a proofreader who come through, and it's much easier to deal with it that way. So the way that I organize it is, often by the type of work that I'm doing, like query critiques or hot sheet issues, or the book that I'm writing. So it's based on the different sectors of my business. Okay, I think I have gotten through all of the questions that came to me through Zoom. I know that some of you may be watching on Facebook, and if you are, thank you so much for joining. I don't look at the questions on Facebook during the live session, but I will be going through the comments later to see if anyone has something that I might be able to shed light on. I do have more sermons coming up on June 28th. I'm going to be talking on a more personal basis about what I consider some of my lucky breaks during my career. And then July 12th, I'm going to get into businessy territory, things that you need to think about before you sign a publishing contract. So this could be a magazine contract or a book publishing contract. So you can register for those at Sunday Business Sermons at my site. And then also I've got paid courses running throughout the summer, which you can also find at janefriedman.com. So thank you all for coming. And if you're interested in the recording, it will be available on Facebook immediately as soon as I click end session. So thank you again. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.